Question is from another Yanis. Yanis Varoufakis.
Oh my God, another Greek.
Hello. Hello?
Possibly another Greek, but certainly a junior doctor.
Hello?
So, Yanis.
Hello, can you hear me?
This is a question to both of our speakers.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Hi.
Hello. You can hear me, yeah?
Yes.
My name is indeed also Yanis. That's a very rare phrase for me to use. I'm on the national executive of the BMA, of the Junior Doctors Committee in the BMA, the Doctors' Trade Union. And as many of you will know, a couple of days ago, we got an overwhelming mandate from our members in our ballot. And that was a mandate of 98% for strike action. Such a radicalisation of junior doctors is unprecedented in the NHS. And my questions are to all three of the members of the panel. The first question is, and the second one is a very short one. The first question is, what advice do you have for us in your long experience of dealing with vociferous smears and slander in the mainstream media? We are already seeing these directed towards us in the run-up to industrial action. And the second is a very simple question. If we do strike, will you support us? Will you defend us? Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. I think I can speak on behalf of the National Union of Teachers to say that you will certainly have our support. And in terms of smears in the press, you have to ride them out and do everything that you can through your own social media and your own communications. However, Yanis.
Well, of course, you'll have the support of the whole of the Greek nation, whose National Health Service is being battered by the misanthropy known as the Troika program. But besides that, concentrating on the situation here, it's important that, firstly, you maintain very strong solidarity with patients during your campaign and find creative ways of combining a strike with a support of those patients. Secondly, I think it's crucial that you find ways in which to juxtapose the way in which you're being treated with the way in which junior financiers are being treated. And to compare and contrast the manner in which the least useful professions are being lavished with immense riches when those who are providing the most basic of goods are being treated like fodder to be discarded or to be abused. Finally, humor. The other day I was talking with Brian Eno, whose daughter is a junior doctor, and so I'm plagiarizing now a story that came from her. In a recent demonstration, I think it was in Manchester, she saw a banner saying, "I'm no gynecologist, but I know a hunt when I see it."
John has to take his head out of his hands now so he can give an answer.
Just when I thought I could keep out of trouble. Can I recommend having a warm, close relationship with the Daily Mail? I was saying to Yanis before we came on, they've stationed a person in my constituency for about 2 months now, trying to dig up any dirt they possibly can. They've spoken to every one of our relatives. They put an advert. I was saying to Yanis, they put an advert in a local newspaper where I lived as a child, saying, "Did anyone know John McDonnell?" And a woman wrote in and said, "I knew John McDonnell. He sat next to me at primary school at St Mary's Catholic School, and he used to whisper God, they get inside the hall, and they used to whisper the maths answers to me, and it would mean that I didn't get the cane from Sister Pancratius, and I just thought that was lovely. It was lovely. But they'll run a story saying he cheats. I just say this, to be frank. This last 7 weeks that we've been in administration, the media assault on us, I think, has been a disgrace to any civilized society. It is, I know it's inevitable in the way the media ownership is in this country, but it does mean, to be frank, we have to commit ourselves now to a media reform, and we need to break up the ownership of our media, the monopoly. It was to give Ed Miliband his due. He included that in the last Labour manifesto, and that's why they came for him so much. Can I say one way you get around it, to be frank, is the way that we've tried to is to create our own media. So Jeremy Corbyn touring around the country talking to meetings with thousands, 2,000 people, I think has been fundamentally important to getting our message across. But also the use of live media. We're making sure now that we go live on air as much as we possibly can, trying to avoid pre-records that can get stitched up, and recognise actually that the written media in this country now, very few people believe anymore because it's become so appallingly extremely right-wing. I think the British public at the moment are overwhelming and on the side of junior doctors and realise that they've been pushed to the absolute extreme. I know no public servant who wants to go on strike. I know no one who wants to let down their patients or their passengers or whatever service they're in. I think people want to go to work and provide a quality service. And when you're faced with the threat to the junior doctors that Jeremy Hunt is at the moment, it isn't just about wages, it isn't just about the hours, it's about the safety of the patients as well. And that's why I tell you, you've got my support.
So thank you very much for that question, Yanis, and do take that back to all of your friends and colleagues. The next question is from Michael Bradley, and I have it written down here. So this is just a question, please, Michael, not a speech.
On the steering committee of United Resistance, and we've worked really closely with the TUCG in campaigning against the trade union bill over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, what happens outside Parliament can be absolutely central, and that's why the Tories are attacking the trade unions. It seems to me over the last couple of weeks, there have been examples of workers who have taken on the trade union laws. People have seen what happened at SOAS, where workers walked out in support of Sandy Nicol and won. At Bridgewater, where they walked out in support of Andrew Mutu and won. And in Lambeth Libraries, where people walked out, all unofficially, all breaking the law. And my question, right, stuff which John might agree with, right, so my question is really that do these workers who have defied anti-trade union laws, do they show us the way forward against the trade union bill? And is the trade union movement justified in taking on what are completely unjust laws and breaking them if those laws are going to be used to break our movement?
The situation that we're in at the moment on the legislation itself, as you know, it's gone through the Commons, it'll be into the Lords, and we'll do all we can. We'll do everything we possibly can to either defeat it or ameliorate it. But the reality is, unfortunately, the government's going to get its way and push most of this through. What does that mean? Well, actually it means, and I quote David Davis, a Conservative MP, it means they're introducing legislation last seen under General Franco. That's a Conservative MP. Actually saying, in opposition to the government, his own government, about the extreme nature of this legislation. This is an attack on a fundamental human right. It flies against all the International Labour Organization conventions. It undermines trade union rights in this country in a way, I've said before, is an existential threat to trade unionism in this country. And I think that's what this is all about. This is a scorched earth policy by this government to kill off trade unionism in this country within this period of office. And we've got to recognise the seriousness of it. That means, of course, using the democratic process to oppose it and to try and prevent it happening. But recognising that if it is introduced into law, if it is enacted, we still have the right, the human right, to resist it. Now, we would not have trade union legislation in this country at all, or any form of trade union rights, if it had abided by the inherited law. We've always had to campaign in a way in which we feel is most effective to secure our basic human rights. And if that means defying unjust legislation, we not just have a right to do it, I think we have a duty.
No, not only do we have a duty, but there is also a long tradition going back to ancient Greek tragedy that confirms this. Sophocles' Antigone is all about the moral imperative to oppose unjust laws. And this is something that we must do. But at the very same time, we must not fall prey to a tendency to be reactive. Just reactive. So it was a mistake, I believe, in 1984 that we didn't have ballots during the miners' strike. We should shower them with democracy. We should use this legislation to have ballots where 90% of workers vote in favor of strikes, and to have ballots every day, even when we don't need to by law, just to drown them in the democratic process.
Roel.
How could the financial sector be shrunk instead of only regulated, since this seems to have so little impact?
In terms of the finance sector in this country at the moment, what we're seeing is, as a result of the crash, as you know, there was that sort of period in which I described it as the sort of the Yellow Brick Road period, where we came to the end of the Yellow Brick Road, and then you were looking for the Wizard of Oz, and then the curtain got pulled back, and you saw not the Wizard of Oz, but that individual just pulling a number of leaders and shouting down microphones. And that was a sudden enlightening for a lot of people in this country, that all of a sudden you realize that this finance sector, the City of London, not only was completely out of control, but even the people who were meant to control it didn't even understand it either. And it was that for a short period, I think people understood that this system isn't just it doesn't work, but actually is completely, it is a casino that was out of everyone's control. And they were dealing with derivative mechanisms that became so complex that even those that were investing had lost control of it as well. And I think there was a sort of a short period, and everyone realized that this system is chaotic, out of control, unplanned, and completely crisis-ridden, and that we would see another crisis in a short period of time if we didn't do something about it. And so then there was a period in which there was an attempt to regulate, a bit of an open discussion, but that didn't last very long, and all of a sudden the waters closed over it again. And what regulation was introduced was extremely limited, and now is being, even the limited regulation that there was, the separations between retail and investment banking within the same bank, even those separations, those borders are being broken down. And I thought it was very interesting with Barclays only a few weeks ago, that they'd got rid of the retail bank manager they'd brought in to try and clean the act up, and they then brought back an investment banker to run the bank. And I thought that was indicative that they think it's back to square one, it's back to normal. The casino wheels are starting to flow again and spin again, and this casino is with our money. That's what's so angry-making, that they gamble with our money and that they take short-term profits, not long-term decisions about investment, and they always walk away. Only a few bankers have actually ever been dragged before the courts. And we saw the HBOS report this week, which exposed what was going on there in terms of, to be frank, a dereliction of duty at every level within that bank itself. So the regulation that was introduced was ineffective, and I think at the end of the day, if we don't address the matter, will actually cause yet again, not just more problems, but the potential of another financial crisis as well. That's why we're committed now to actually reviewing the banking system. We're actually doing a number of reviews from the Labour Party now. I've set up a review of the Treasury. I've set up a review of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England that will extend to the Bank of England as a whole. But we want to then extend that and have a discussion about, again, a further review of the banking sector. Yanis and I were talking about it before. Elsewhere, the Glass-Steagall Act that was introduced after the financial crisis in the 1930s in America, this split between a retail and investment banking is what we argued for from the left during the last crisis and wasn't taken on board. We want to bring that back onto the agenda as well. So in that way, yes, we do want to introduce effective regulation. In addition to that, we also want to look at, as we've proposed the National Investment Bank, public ownership of that National Investment Bank, so it becomes something that we can rely upon to take wise, long-term, patient investment decisions. That's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of the size of the finance sector, to be frank, my argument at the moment is to try and rebuild the other sectors in such a way that we're not unbalanced in the way that we are. And that does mean long-term investment, particularly in new technology, because I think that's our future as a country. But that new technology has to feed back into our manufacturing base so we get a balanced economy again. Now, that's going to take, I think it's going to take investment, democratic control of the way investment is undertaken, working with the city and elsewhere, but making sure that we're actually introducing agreements with finance capital in a way that we can actually ensure we control the flow of capital within this country again. At the moment, it's the chaotic nature of the financial system which ensures that it's crisis-ridden. That's a huge agenda. In terms of the City of London at the moment, we're now going through a series of discussions about how we come, I suppose, in the first instance, come to get them to understand that actually we cannot tolerate a finance sector that is not contributing to the prosperity of the country overall. And that means that that means a combination of regulation, democratic control, and in some instances, public ownership as well. In that way, I think we rebalance our economy so that our finance sector becomes a contributing element rather domineering vehicle that is undermining the long-term prosperity of the country.
As you can imagine, this is a topic very close to my heart. So let me try to be succinct. In 4 ways is the answer to your question. How do we do it? In 4 ways. Firstly, as John said, a complete separation of banks or banking activities that involve deposits from depositors from the casino part of the financial sector. So if you are taking deposits, you can't speculate on financial derivatives and assets. Very simple. And if you want to speculate, that's fine, do it, but you cannot take deposits. Yep, number 1. Number 2, all derivative trades should be cleared through a clearing house that is open and transparent, no more under-the-table private transactions. Thirdly, legislating against the way by which financial assets are assessed by credit rating agencies. It is quite absurd. I've been a teacher all my life. Imagine if my salary as a teacher were to come from the students just after they receive the result, the grade that I've given them. Yeah? Imagine that. Everybody would get an A. Which is precisely what happened during the years of profligacy of the financial sector, credit ratings. Well, this is what happens. There's a financier, creates a toxic derivative, and then auctions off the service of who's going to rate it. And says to credit rating agencies, come and give me the rating I want, and I will pay you in relation to the credit rating that you give me. That has to be legislated away. And one way of doing it is to have the central bank, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and so on, have their own credit rating scheme, so they do not rely on Standard & Poor's, because that will give new standards where everybody were going to be poor again. And finally, reshape our economy so the financial sector is not so oversized is to grow the rest of the economy, and to do it through the investment schemes that we were talking before about, and make it so that young people who graduate from the great schools, from the London School of Economics, from Cambridge, from Harvard, from INSEAD, and so on and so forth, do not immediately think that they want to dedicate 40, 50 years of their lives pushing paper and doing absolutely nothing that contributes to humanity.
Thanks very much. Our next question is from Rob Williams, and it's just a question to John.
Christine, Rob Williams, sending my solidarity, John, from the National Shop Stewards Network to this event, but also John and Jeremy's anti-austerity campaign. First of all, I just want to ask everyone to send a message of support. This is Clive Walder and John Vasey, sacked CWU reps from BT and Royal Mail. Just send a message of support to them. I just wanted to ask a question. John, correctly, we would all support you in building a mass movement against austerity in the communities. Next Wednesday, more cuts are coming down their way into those communities. And therefore, in 2012, you played a major part in inaugurating a conference of Labour councillors against the cuts to look at how we could resist those cuts. And I think that is something that I wanted to ask you, particularly as those councillors, 100 Labour councillors, are going to be in the front line as they have been over the last 5 years. Those councillors combined have a combined capital of £70 billion, of reserves, something like £7 billion. We could come up with a strategy that sends a clear message that is a campaign against austerity. Thanks.
I think I said earlier, I met with a number of the Labour Council leaders a week ago, and all of them are reporting back the scale of the impact of the cuts so far and the concerns that they've got if they're asked for another 20%. As I said, Osborne looks as though he's going to allow them to have a marginal increase on the council tax to cover adult social care, or social care generally, but that most probably won't make up for the scale of the cuts so far. The problem that individual councillors have got, and I can completely understand it, in the 1980s when I was chair of finance on the GLC, it was almost like halcyon days basically, and we'd agree no-cut strategies and we'd be able to campaign against them, and we weren't in the same situation as it is today, which is the Tories got wise to this campaign that we could undertake, and they introduced legislation whereby individual councils, if they don't bring a balanced budget in, and those periods in the 1980s, we could take a period of time of campaign to do that. They got wise to that, so they introduced legislation where now we have a process where if the councillors don't agree a balanced budget, the officers literally within 24 hours can do that. Now I find that totally undemocratic, and I find it abhorrent because of what it effectively does. It centralises the state in the hands of the Secretary of State for communities and local government, able to give a diktat on virtually what every local council budget will be. The reality is the enemy here is central government, the Tories. So what I've said to the council leaders is that after the comprehensive spending review and after the local government settlement, we'll come back together, and from the Labour Party we will launch a national campaign. No longer let individual councillors be isolated or individual councils on their own, but we launch a national campaign against the cuts, and we expose what's happening on the ground, and we mobilise our communities. It's the point Yanis made about the doctors. We've got to ensure that along with the councillors and the campaigners we mobilise those who are recipients of those services that are being cut, the recipients of those services that have gone already, the people who are actually now no longer get the social care or have had their library closed, or have, in some instances, as you know, the Sure Star centres that have been closing down almost on a monthly basis right the way across the country. We've got to mobilise this as a community campaign. And we know who the real enemy is. The real enemy is not in your local council. The real enemy in central government, and I think we've got to focus on that. And in that way, we can remobilise what's been lacking in recent years, is a national movement around local council cuts, because individual council campaigns that have gone on, I've admired them, but they've been isolated, and then one by one, unfortunately, they've been not defeated, but they've been marginalised to a large extent. We've got to make this now a national issue. In the same way we campaign around the NHS, in the same way we campaign around other national services, we've got to make this no longer just a local community campaign. We've got to combine them together and mobilise them as a national campaign. So we'll be suggesting to the council leaders when they come back together, when they've analysed the scale of the cuts that are being threatened, we'll be suggesting to them and recommending we launch a national campaign. And one way of doing that would be to bring together Labour councillors and others who are campaigning with us in a national conference, some form of national body in which we can express what I think is the deep, not just anger and anguish, but actually the real deep concern now that in a number of areas, we're on the edge. We're on the edge of almost civilized practice. I do not want to see any more those elderly people getting those 15-minute visits by home helps and other home visitors because that's the only time they can spare, because that's the sort of oppressive regime they're working in, and they don't even get paid for their travelling time, and in some instances they don't even get the minimum wage. I think what we've got to do is expose that of what's going on the ground, expose what's happening to those families who no longer can attend the Sure Start Centre where their kids used to mix with others in the playgroups, etc. And yes, expose what's happening in terms of our housing crisis. Council, I don't know what it's like in your area, but tonight 200 families in my constituency will be in bed and breakfast. I think we've got to expose that, and the local council campaign will be a national campaign that we'll lead.
Thank you, John. Our sixth question to both our speakers is from Adam Baghdadi. Here, please.
Hi, thanks so much for being here and for taking my question. It's for both of you. And it's quite a short one. What, in your view, would an optimal British welfare state look like?
It would be one which was based upon rights, because when the welfare state was introduced after the Second World War, it was based upon an agenda, not of one that, and see, we use the word welfare now as well, which I find a bit abhorrent too. We introduced a system which was social security, so that everybody was secure, no matter what their situation in life, no matter what their situation in society. And that's what it was. It was basically, if you remember, we wanted to introduce a system where everybody was secure. There was always a safety net, but beyond that safety net, it gave the opportunity to fulfill in their ambitions to the full. That's why education was free, because we wanted people to devote their talents, develop them in a way, because we knew not only they would enjoy it themselves, they'd fulfill themselves, but they'd contribute back into society. That's why we wanted the NHS free at the point of need, because we knew that actually that was the best way of ensuring equality of treatment and access of treatment. We introduced social housing, we introduced council housing, because we wanted everybody to have a decent roof over their heads, whether they were owner-occupiers or renters, it didn't matter. It was also a process of equality too. We introduced a system of rights so that people had access to the law to defend those rights, whether it was housing, social security, or whether it was education or whatever. All of that is being systematically dismantled. This government is introducing a scorched earth policy to destroy, dismantle every element of that welfare state in this next 5-year period, because they may well think this could be their last opportunity to get rid of the welfare state. And that's why they name it welfare. And there was one of their campaign leaflets from about 15, 18 years ago, 96, before the 97 general election, actually typified what they were about, which was introducing a very minimalist safety net at the best, local authorities actually developing their charities so that welfare would become a charitable exercise, and then privatising every other element of the welfare state, NHS, etc. So it's privatisation, a charitable base, and a minimal safety net. That's a return to the 1930s. And do you know, if they get away with it through this comprehensive spending rule in this coming period, the expenditure on the state will be back down to the levels of the 1930s. So I think we've got to now talk and through and rebuild a welfare state which is based upon rights and opportunities and equality and social justice. And in that way, I think we can restore confidence in people that we can have a society that we can genuinely call civilized, that we can genuinely really develop the next generation on. At the moment, the problem that I've got is that we're passing on to the next generation a limited level of expectation. You know, when I went on the student marches and all bloody Daily Mail did their usual bit, you know, I said then, education was always seen as a gift from one generation to another. And I always thought, I was brought up during that period when we saw the society developing in a lateral line, always going upwards. I never ever thought that we'd go backwards. I never thought the next generation would most probably run the risk of having a life expectancy less than mine. And that's where we've got to. So I think that's where we rebuild it. One based upon rights, and one based upon an absolute commitment that we're going to invest so that people's lives improve rather than get denigrated and pushed backwards.
Of the good society. So what should our ambition for the good society be? I think it should be the same as the ambition entertained by rich families for their members. If you have rich families, do not abandon a child if it proves to be incompetent and has a tendency towards malfeasance. They look after that child. And they do hope that one day he or she is going to develop their talents and they try to empower them. I think that's what the good society should try to do. The problem with rich families is that they don't care about extending their own ambitions to the ambitions of society at large. But this is why we need the labor movement. On a broader issue, however, just to add to what John said, we're moving in a direction due to technological innovation when labor-saving technologies are going to grow exponentially. And that is pushing our capitalist world into deeper and deeper crisis as output growth gets decoupled from employment growth. And as this is happening, the great question, of course, is going to be on the capacity of our societies to hold together and to be able to be good societies in the way that I described it. And in this context, it will be of the essence to find ways of reconfiguring property rights over the wealth that we'll be creating, over the machinery that creates the wealth, so that in the end we can hope for a future where the machines, our own artifacts, become our slaves rather than the other way around. And just to conclude, it doesn't make much sense to try to reinvent good expressions when others have said it so well in the past. So the good society and the proper welfare state is the one, as Karl Marx put it, which takes according to people's capacities and gives according to their needs.
I'm afraid one question from the floor, because we're out of time now, so I'm going to take you. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your talks. I'm also a member of the Greek Mafia, so I'm going to ask a double question, actually, about two topics that kept coming up in every speech today.
Quick.
On the one hand, everyone was saying that, paying their respects to victims of terrorism. On the other hand, people were talking about the injustice of capitalism. But one thing that we didn't do was to put them together. And one argument that has been made before, and I won't reveal the the surprise guest, but you agreed, Yanis, was the idea that if you defeat capitalism, you also defeat you also defeat terrorism and ISIS. So I wanted the speakers to comment on that. And the other question was to John McDonnell, who insists that if only we expose that there is no one behind the curtain, if only we all knew that behind the financial system, behind capitalism, there is this pathetic old man who pulls the strings. Well, I think we all know it. I think the Mail readers know it. I don't think it's enough to just expose it. I mean, because they are passionately invested in the ignorance of not knowing. So you have to go beyond exposing it.
Stop. Thank you. Okay. Yanis, and then John.
Very, very brief on ISIS. We can't afford to wait for capitalism to be defeated before we struggle against the atrocities that we have been seeing in the Middle East in particular. Our wonderfully wise leaders found a way of putting the fear of God, I'm saying this as an atheist, into the regimes of South Africa and the various... South Africa, sorry. See, my wife is in South Africa, I got confused. The regimes of Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and various other forces that are financing ISIS.
Whatever the solution is to ISIS, let me say this, it is not bombing Syria. Very briefly, you're right. It isn't enough just to expose the system. We have to offer an alternative to it, and also not just the alternative in theory, but the alternative route as well. And I think that's where we are now. I think that's where we actually are. I don't think the election of Jeremy Corbyn was done because all of a sudden a large number of people were just terribly despondent and traumatized after the May elections. I think the election of Jeremy Corbyn was as a result of the exposure of how our system is failing people, the demand for an alternative, and the search for hope. And I think that's where we're at. And what I find, despite all the media attacks and despite some of the internal dissensions that we've had, I think this could be possibly the most creative political period that we've had in this country for generations in how we explore.
One last submitted question. It's from Peter Davidson, and it's for Yanis. Quick, microphone here. Microphone here. No, it's coming.
Here it is.
It's coming.
It's behind you.
Pantomime season,
Okay, thank you. This question's for Yanis. I've read a lot of your articles, Yanis, and also your blog. And I'd like to say thank you very much indeed for your clarity, realism, and common sense, bringing that to the eco-political debate. And my question is really very simple. When you were Greek finance minister, on at least one occasion in Parliament, you wore a fantastic, psychedelic, beautiful, pink, grey, blue, and red shirt. Please, Yanis, will you tell me where I can get one?
Go on. Where did you get it? Name that source.
I'm afraid you need a time machine that will take you to Sydney in 1998. It's where I bought it.
Thank you very much to our fabulous speakers, John McDonnell and Yanis Varoufakis. Thank you very much. Come on, they want photos. Yes.